math. And we're going to separate them into little chunks. So we'll talk about age, demographics first, then we'll talk about housing, and then we'll talk about employment and industry. So that breaks it up a little bit as we go through. Okay. All right, so quick reminder from last time. Go ahead, John. These are the goals and policies that you talked about with Jamie. I'm not going to run through them all again, but I just wanted to bring us back to December since it's been a few months and just give you a little bit of context for where we started and where we're going. All right, John, go ahead. Okay, so starting off with population and education and those sorts of general demographic features, these are what I consider some key highlights having just dug into your data. This is, of course, not the end-all, be-all conclusions from this data, but these are some ones I think would be important to look at as we go through the next few charts. And please feel free to fully turn around and look at the screen if that's easier for you, whatever works. One is a stabilizing population. The population in Holly has been growing over time and starting to stabilize over the last 2 decades. A second one is a declining growth rate. When it comes to stabilizing, that is because of a declining growth rate, and that's pretty on par with the county as well. The third one that I'd like to emphasize is an aging region. So the state of Michigan on a whole is aging faster than other states in the country. We are also one of the only states that lost population in the last census. So it's really common to see communities getting an older average age as they progress over time. Third one is high education rates, and the fourth one is more people living with disabilities. All right, John, let's get into it. So this is the population over time for Holly Township and the village of Holly. As you can see, the village of Holly stabilized around 2000, while the township has been steadily growing. Over the last, decade, our growth rate has slowed, and when we're projecting out to the future, to 2050, it's anticipated that we will continue growing at maybe 1% a year, but something very, very small as we stabilize off into the roughly 7,000 odd population range. All right, John, go ahead. Similarly, this is showing the growth rate over time. So in 1970, things were booming, really high growth rates. Into the 1990s, that decline, that's pretty common. Boost back up in the 2010s, especially as housing really, really took off before 2008, and then once again, a drop in growth rate over time. So one thing I'd like to mention is that, as I said, on average, communities are aging. The Township of Holly is aging at about the same rate as Oakland County overall, so it's nothing surprising. In fact, these are all of your neighbor communities right up here on the map. The only community that has actually been decreasing in average age is the city of Fenton. So, you're very on par with your neighbors, and Fenton really stands out as the only community that's attracting a lot of young families. And this chart doesn't look that exciting, but it's a lot of boxes. But basically, the dark band at the bottom is the amount of your population that's under 18. The middle colored band is the population that's working age, which is generally considered 18 to 64, although if you're a golf caddy, you can start at 12, whatever's up to you. And then the top is the population 65 and over, generally considered the retired population. Over the last decade, the working age population has contracted very slightly in Holly Township, while the population of seniors or those over 65 has grown very slightly, and the population under 18 has similarly shrunk just a tiny bit. Nothing dramatic, but it is in line with the overall state trends for which populations are growing and shrinking. All right, so before I move on to demographics of different types, any questions about aging? All right.
Keep these trends in mind. The reason we look at these is because we've already been confronted with housing types that cater to these age groups. So keep an eye on these trends and see how it influences what types of housing proposals we get is obviously an important thing.
Yeah, all right, great summary, John. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the ethnic breakdown of the township. This is something that the state of Michigan requires that every master plan have. In some places, it's very revealing. In some places, it's not quite as illuminating, but we should definitely talk about it here in Holly Township. So the first thing to note is the proportion of Hispanic or Latino residents to non-Hispanic or Latino residents. One thing I want to just clarify with this item is that the census is not the best at classifying when someone is Hispanic or not. So Hispanic is generally considered an ethnicity that is overlaid with race. So you can be both white and Hispanic, you can be both black and Hispanic. There's a lot of overlap there. The census treats Hispanic like it's its own category. It doesn't consider there to be any overlap. And that's pretty hard when people identify as both one race and one ethnicity. So when I show you this map, just keep in mind that the census is treating these as two completely exclusive categories that do not overlap with race at all. And that's something that isn't necessarily accurate. But as you can see, majority non-Hispanic population. And this is the other side I was talking about, which is what the census considers racial categories. And here we're comparing Holly Township to Oakland County. As you can see, they're both pretty homogeneous. There's not too much variation between categories. Oakland County generally has a higher population of African American and Asian residents, whereas Holly Township has a higher population of white residents.
Really? I don't think that.
Any questions about race and ethnicity before we move on past that?
No, I think that's right. I would have thought
Okay,
it's
John,
funny
any
how
thoughts
they
on that one?
go.
Okay, great. So, education. Holly Township is on the far left here in the slightly darker bar, and it's just important to note that Holly Township is doing really well in terms of education. In fact, the entire Oakland County area has pretty high rates of both bachelor's and high school degrees. In Holly Township, we have roughly a quarter of the population that is getting a bachelor's degree and higher, and almost, actually a little over 90% of all residents have a high school graduate degree, or a GED, which is the equivalent. And as you can see, Oakland County is the highest in terms of bachelor attainment, but keep in mind that Oakland County encompasses a lot of places that have, concentrated secondary education institutions. Like if you look at Southfield, which is in Oakland County, they have Lawrence Tech University right inside. So of course they're going to have a higher bachelor attainment rate than their other comparable places. John, any thoughts on education?
No.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so the next one to launch into is the population with a disability. So if we're talking about aging overall, it's also important to talk about what proportion of the population is living with a disability of some sort. So it's important to note here that disability is self-reported, and some people might have a mobility impairment, a visual impairment, a cognitive impairment, but not consider themselves disabled. So this chart represents those who self-reported as having a disability, not those who may have a challenge but don't call it that. This chart also, should note, does not necessarily encompass the full range of patients with dementia, Alzheimer's, or similar diseases, because often those are very hard to self-report. That involves someone in your family, if you're in an advanced stage, also reporting that for you. So as you can see, we have 14% of the overall township population is living with a disability, whereas when you go up to the over 65 population, it's about over a quarter.
That's quite high. I'm surprised.
And I should say, it is generally understood that the population over 65 is closer to about 50% of people living with some sort of disability. But again, this is self-reported, so often it's a lower number.
So, with this statistic, I would say when we talk more frequently now about accessibility on anything from public sites like your, the Heritage, the Farmstead project, or new projects that come in like the mixed-use project, when we talk about making it accessible for people, all people, we're talking about people with disabilities that may not have ease of mobility that most of us enjoy. So again, a statistic that we keep an eye on and keep in mind when we're looking at these projects that come in.
And I always like to think to myself, if I'm in a room with 10 people, that basically means that at least one person in that room is living with a disability. So it's more frequent than we all probably imagine. This is a quick breakdown of disability type. So in Holly Township, mobility and cognition are by far the two largest categories, whereas vision and self-care challenges are more towards the bottom. And like I said, this can be a little skewed because oftentimes folks with cognition difficulties don't always self-report accurately. So just keep in mind that that might be a little low. Cognition may be the highest category in reality.
Do these include like assisted living numbers, nursing home numbers, and things like that? Like that data is collected in?
That data is not collected by the
Okay.
U.S. Census, but it is collected by the state.
Okay.
So this is the number of people, not the number of units.
Okay, so this would be based on census data, not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, this is 2021 census data.
Okay.
So this is the most recent estimate that we have.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any questions on disability or disability types? Okay, sounds good. We'll keep going. All right, so the next part we're going to talk about is housing, which is probably the most interesting part. And I should mention, as a part of the master plan, we will be conducting a very in-depth housing analysis. It'll account for about 1/3 of our work on this project. These figures that you have before you are some very basic figures to get your minds churning, to get you thinking about housing, overall in the township, but this is not yet the in-depth analysis that we'll be talking about later in the project. So, a few things to think about. Housing pace of construction is generally keeping up with new population here in the township, but I'll mention it's not necessarily meeting the housing need of everyone in the township. Second one is declining construction. Since the pandemic, construction has declined due to high material costs, difficulty with labor, insert a variety of reasons. I think we've all heard them from our neighbors and friends. And then the third one is that housing values are increasing, but costs are too. Cost of mortgage, cost of rent, whatever else is associated. All right, so over the last decade, 733 new people in the township and 299 new housing units. With the average number of people per home, that means that housing is growing at 95% the rate of the overall population. But it's important to keep in mind that housing has been growing kind of unevenly over the last decade. You've seen a lot of growth in certain types of housing, such as apartment buildings or single-family homes, but not in other types. So you'll often hear about something called starter homes. When talking about a young couple wants to buy a house that's under $80,000 so they can get their foot in the door to home ownership. Those kinds of affordable homes are in short supply across the entire state. And Holly is not exempt from that. So just because we're keeping up with the rate of the population does not mean we're actually meeting those affordability needs.
So this figure here, this is per the county, not...
So the first four are just the township. The bottom one is also the township median price, which is about the same as the county median price.
All right.
Sorry, that was probably confusing. I could have written that better. Yeah, these are all township figures right here.
I think Holly's figures would be way lower than the rest of them.
All right, John, you ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. This is your new housing construction over time. So as you can see, you had your steepest housing construction from about 2000 to 2019. And then since then, it started to level off. There were very few new housing units constructed over the last few years, although you guys know very well that some are in the works right now, including some mobile home developments and other ones like that. And this is what I meant by housing type. So over the last decade, housing has not been built evenly in every type and category of housing. There's been a comparatively large growth in mobile home housing, but there hasn't been that much growth in single-family detached housing. There's been a large growth in multi-unit apartments, but not so much in duplexes. And our housing analysis will go into more about whether or not this growth is actually matching the demand, the housing types that people want. Yeah, any questions about this one right here? John, any thoughts? Okay, we'll keep going. And then this is a breakdown between the township and the county. The county has a much higher renter occupancy rate than the township. That's pretty common, I would say. In fact, I think every township I work for has a higher ownership rate than they do a renter occupied rate. And that is in part because Oakland County is a very broad place that encompasses a lot of different types of communities. Really urban ones on the south end often have a much higher renter rate, which is kind of bringing down that average. And this is what I meant by, even though the housing values are rising, for example, housing values are a median of 180,000, whereas a decade ago it was 90,000. But it also means that costs are rising. That includes mortgages and rents. So the average median rent in Holly Township is $868. And I will say that is low for the Oakland County area overall, but that can be as high as someone pays living in Ann Arbor or a place that has really high rental costs. So it's something to keep in mind that overall, more and more people are becoming burdened by their rent than they have been over the past decade. All right, any questions on housing or thoughts before we move on? Okay, cool. So now we're going to get into the employment, economic, industry part of the presentation. Some key highlights: low unemployment. Nice going, guys. Keeping it low. Second one, there are more families in economic hardship since the pandemic has begun, which is pretty true nationwide. 3, Holly Township has proportionally more jobs in management and also service and sales than other areas in Oakland County. And then lastly, you all probably could have predicted this, but there's more people working at home than in the past.
Definitely.
All right, go ahead, Jen. So, current unemployment rate, 5.7%. When unemployment rates start to get over 8%, that's when people start to get pretty nervous. Obviously, 2% would be great. That's what everyone's always striving for. But I would say Holly Township is doing pretty well being in the middle of that section. This is the median household income comparison. So, compared to Groveland Township and Fenton Township, Holly Township's median income is much lower. However, we are straddling the middle between the village and then Oakland County overall. And it is true that in townships you'll generally find a lower median income than in other places, especially in more rural communities. So I wouldn't say I'm particularly surprised by this, but it is something to note when thinking about what is an affordable home here in Holly Township versus a different part of Oakland County. Questions on this one? John?
Should point out that that's not average price. This is median, so half is above and half is below, which makes a big difference. Because if you look at average price, it could be quite different from this.
Yeah, and we choose median because it's a better representation of the data. Like you just said, it actually straddles the middle, not including the people that make $5 million and the people that make $12,000. And like I said, there is a higher proportion of families under poverty or economic hardship than there was pre-pandemic. So when looking at this chart, I want to clarify exactly what economic hardship is. So the federal poverty level is a earning cap set by the federal government for accessing federal assistance programs. I think for a single person working, the federal poverty level is, I want to say, $15,000 a year. So that's pretty hard times, right? Whereas a good measure of what is actual hardship is usually 150% of the federal poverty level. So that would be $20,000 a year. And the reason we set it at that is because that's still a level where you're experiencing a lot of practical difficulties, making rent, affording basic necessities, but you're not at such a level that the federal government is necessarily subsidizing everything you do. So this chart is showing the number, or the percentage of families that are under 150% of the federal poverty level. And I will say the federal poverty level is adjusted by the number of people that are in a family. So if you're one person living alone, it's 15,000. But if you have two people in a family, it raises up to 25,000. So this is adjusted based on the number of people in the family. Any thoughts on this one?
It's low. I mean, for people to, for housing, even under your HUD guidelines, interesting. Low.
It is low. And I will say, you're obviously doing much better than the village. All right.
100% of workers are in management.
Occupations. So, as I mentioned earlier, almost half of all the workers in Holly Township are involved in management or business. And I would say, separating this out, occupation is how someone self-reports what industry they work in. Whereas industry is when an actual industrial employer reports how many employees they have. So they're broken out into two different classifications based on who's reporting that. So 48% of workers self-report that they're in management and business. Meanwhile, 29.1% of industry reports that their workers are in manufacturing. So that's how you separate these two. And we like to look at both because it gives us a better picture of how the population is broken down into where they work. And I would also say that education and healthcare make up the second largest category. That makes perfect sense. Michigan overall, education and healthcare are the second largest employment industry.
So, the question I have on this is, so under occupation, the individual is saying it, industry, would that be, so for example, a manufacturing, or let's say healthcare facility in a neighboring township, we have an individual from Holly Township that works there. That's how that would be reported, is that that entity is reporting that, hey, we have people from your area that work here?
So it's businesses in Holly Township reporting their proportion of workers.
They're coming
in
and working in Holly Township.
Okay.
Yeah, so it gives you
I see.
the worker perspective and the business owner perspective from Holly Township specifically.
Being a bedroom community, a lot of the people work outside of Holly, so the second numbers probably aren't very accurate for what
Yeah,
is
and
what
we
I would say.
Yeah, we are more spread as well. I can give you guys the full industry breakdown. It's just a very boringly large table. So you guys can check out the raw data and poke through it a little bit more too.
Well, Nani, am I right in that when you're talking about industry, what this is saying is that 29% of the jobs that exist in Holly are manufacturing jobs?
Basically, yes.
So out of 100% of the jobs that are here in Holly, which is not very many jobs in Holly, because most people drive outside of Holly, 29% of those are manufacturing.
Yeah.
So
So it makes the other number look more correct because they're driving someplace else to do the management. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, I don't know. Well, we'll have to look at that. SEMCOG has the amount of people that drive out of the community to work and the number of people who drive into the community to work. So
Yeah.
they're two different populations. So, you know, when you're thinking about your policies, you gotta think about that too. You've got people visiting Holly because they work here every day. You got people visiting Holly because they come to Mount Holly, because they come to ride on the in the ORV park, because they come to the Renaissance Festival, because they come to downtown Holly, because they come to the the National Cemetery. So you've got a lot of other people other than the people that live here coming into town. So again, when you think about your policies and things like that, it's just context to keep in mind.
Mhm. And I will say sometimes it can be hard to capture seasonal tourism because the census picks a day in a year to send out these forms and get information back. So depending on what day it gets filled out in a given year, you may have someone say, oh, right now I'm working at the Big B Coffee, so I'm working in the service industry. Whereas if it was the winter and they were doing their seasonal job at Mount Holly, they might self-report as being in the tourism industry. So there is a little bit of difference there depending on when it was conducted.
It also, when we're looking at our master plan, what do we want to attract to people? What do we want to in our zoning? And what do we want so we bring people into Holly?
That's exactly right. And I was going to point that out. Now you have the little slide.
Yep, that's the community slide if that's what you want. But it's,
Okay.
it's just if you want to chat about that. It's
No, when we're done with this, I just want to.
Okay. Sounds good. So as we were just talking about, this is the breakdown of residents in Holly that are reporting how they get to work. Vast majority is car, truck, and van driving alone. And that's often because, like you said, we have lots of commuters that go to the other communities around Holly Township and usually by themselves in their own vehicle. However, our work from home numbers have spiked since 2019. In 2019, you were seeing roughly 3% working from home, whereas now it's almost 10. And this might decline in the future, this might rise in the future. It's very hard to predict, but right now it is a notable chunk of the population. And we have a small number of carpoolers as well. And no public transportation, which you might expect. All right.
Yeah.
So
No,
what I was
start.
just going to say was that, as Nani pointed out in the beginning, this is looking at this information, sort of talks about past trends, and also provides a snapshot of today-ish of where people are, and we're going to give you more information about that. But at the end of the day, the master planning process is about setting your own vision of where you want the township to go, and comparing that to these trends and the existing conditions, help you identify what kind of intervention do you want to make? What do we want to do differently if we want to attract a different group of people to the community? Or if we want to do something different than we've had in the past? That means you do something different with your policy. So that's the connection between looking at where you are today, what's happened recently, so that when you develop your action plan, your master plan, and your vision, you can make progress.
Like young families. If you decide you really want to target young families, then you would, design your interventions to help appeal to that group, which you're currently not attracting at a very high rate.
And if you want to make sure that the people who are aging here in the community have a place to live in the community, without the stress of single family ownership or living on a 10 or 20 acre piece of property, they have a place here that they can move to that they would feel comfortable living in, and not going to Troy or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
we'll leave it up to you folks for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, any board members have any thoughts, any comments? Well, I think when we look at this, we need to really look at the areas that we see the greatest need. And as you said, it might be over 65. And we want to have places for those people to live. But we don't want to gear everything just to that, because we don't want to be just a place where you go when you're old, or you're here when you're old. To be sustainable, we've got to bring in a certain amount of housing and offer a certain amount of opportunity for business and growth. Also, I think for maybe younger, more middle-aged, they're raising their families, they're starting out here, the schools are doing good, they may stay longer, maybe they might move from one house into then a little bit bigger house or buy property.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got things working in your favor. You've got a good school district.
We have a
and
good
you've
school
got
district.
Affordable. You've got housing that isn't as expensive as it is, say, in Fenton or something like that. So it's, you can buy a house here, like you said, you can get your foot in the door and you can start to
That's right.
move your way up. And again, looking at Fenton, who has sort of the trend of getting younger, why is that? What's going on in Fenton that's attracting young people? You know, it's the cool bars and the restaurants
right.
and the activities that they have going in downtown.
Shopping, the
Yep.
stores.
Sculptures and all.
So from that standpoint, it's important to maintain our relationship with the Village of Holly.
Yes.
And in the Village of Holly, which is beautiful and has a wonderful history and legacy and everything like that, well, what's its next chapter, right? You know, what is the next series of events and activities, and what's the new restaurant that's coming into town? What's the new public space? What's the, you know, the Dickens Festival is fantastic, right? It's been successful for how long?
50 years.
Years next
Yes.
year, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so how do we, what's the Dickens Festival 2.0? Or what's the counterpart to the Dickens Festival that talks to young people and what they want to hear? So those are all kind of policies that follow up on the master plan, so that, you know, it's more than just a land use plan. There's a lot of programming that has to go into it. You know, the bike paths, the multi-purpose paths, connections to the recreation areas, to attract the people that, you know, you want to see move in here.
Yes, definitely.
Going back to Fenton, I would actually say, which came first, the restaurants, or was it there's just a lot more apartment complexes, newer complexes, that would attract young people compared to Holly? When you look at Holly, we have a few older complexes, but we don't have anything new like they built several in the last 10, 15 years, and I think that brought the young people in. Then the bars and restaurants probably followed more to that than the other way around. But
That's a great point. That's a great point. I mean, the word on the street these days is that, and Nani, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but people choose where they want to live first because they can work from home, because they're willing to drive further to go to work. You know, especially if they only have to drive in 2 or 3 days a week. So, and especially if they're going to sit in an autonomous vehicle in the future, you know, whatever. But they pick where they want to live first, right? So what are the amenities? And there's pioneers too. You know, there's people that move into an unproven area before it really is established itself, you know.
I won't correct him, I definitely did that.
I mean, I think I see, you know, families, of course, with COVID, with everything we've gone through in the last 5 years or so, I think we, you know, kind of changed our way of thinking, but I see families and stuff wanting to be in areas where they can stay within in that area, they can do more. Now, we might not end up with, you know, a Menards or something big like that, but we still are close enough to some of those other areas that do have it, So I think it's really important that we make sure, we stay within our means for attractive, affordable housing, areas where we want to see some growth to attract business. Because when you think about it, really a family coming in, as much as we've had issues, we have the Renaissance Festival, you could go skiing. Downtown Holly is really in itself just a really unique area to go. You've got the ORV park, there's camping in the area. So I think those are things, we're fairly close to all the expressways, so I think those are things that we have to really keep in mind when we go out there to project what we want.
See, what I fault Fenton with is they've attracted the people, the industry, the businesses, but the infrastructure wasn't built for it. So it's really hard to get through Fenton sometimes.
It is
really
very
is
hard.
congested, and I'm not sure how they can fix it now that the other things are
That's
there.
right. That's why
And
I
so
said
I
we
think
might
that's
not.
one of the things we need to look at is, do we have the infrastructure for what we're projecting? Because if we don't, it just makes it
Mm-hmm.
miserable for everybody, I would say.
So for us, if I look at our map and I think about growth for us, for me, the greatest part of growth, if we're looking at bringing in the revenue, which is going to give us the tax dollars, it is going to be on the northern part up there, North Holly Road, up in that area, which connects closer to Grand Blanc. You've got the Dixie Highway corridor. So we do have areas where if we look at it in the right way, we can bring in growth. There is infrastructure there, because we're not going to put anything major in the center of our township, because, we have to be careful with that, because again, infrastructure.
Yep, and so, the challenge is making sure the infrastructure comes at the same time as the development, because.
Very good point.
You
Yes.
don't want to be sitting on, $1 billion worth of infrastructure, pipes and roads and stuff with no development. And Michigan is a state that doesn't require developers to pay their proportionate share of capital improvement costs, right? So
That's right.
a new project comes in and it adds 50%, takes up 50% of the capacity of the road network. They don't have to pay for that. Okay, there's no impact fees. So implementing, funding mechanisms like a DDA or a corridor improvement authority, where the taxes that are generated from development go into the infrastructure is, one approach to do it. It's still, it still costs the taxpayer, but eventually it'll pay off the infrastructure. The infrastructure will be there when it's needed.
When it's needed.
Yeah.
Yes, and I
There-
think we, just our board discussing Riverside, we've seen that. They want to put in a project, and the infrastructure it's very hard to figure the infrastructure right there.
That's why the Silverman project is
So,
a classic
good
thing.
point.
Not all our concerns, but
Very good
just the
point.
traffic already is
That's
getting
right.
bad to that area, and how you're going to handle it, and how are they going to, funnel it onto Grange Hall Road, which that's almost the only place they can go.
Yes.
So
The other fun thing with infrastructure is, they have to build roads at a minimum standard, right? A minimum size, a minimum capacity. And so when the road is first built and there's not much development, and people are flying around there thinking, this is great, man. This intersections are functioning at a level of service A all day long. Then the first project comes along and it lowers it down to a level of service B. So then you say to yourself, well, do I need to widen the road just because it's at a level of service B? No. But you also don't want to wait till it gets to level of service F. So the level of service for intersections goes from A to F, just like your report card did when you were in school. F is where you basically have gridlock. So you don't want to wait till you get there. But you also have to realize that you may have to wait a little bit longer at the intersection when it goes from A to B. So when residents come in and say, I have to wait longer at the intersection now than I ever did before. But the traffic consultant said, well, it's still at a level of service B. Okay, that's reasonable, to maintain a level of service B. Otherwise, the cost for that capacity is ridiculously high. You can only pay for a certain level of service. You can only a certain level is sustainable. So You gotta find that sweet spot.
In north of us, in Grand Lake Township, they've expanded considerably for the Dort project and
Yeah.
Baldwin Road, that area, which is also going to put pressure on us to some extent as well. But I don't know of any major projects in Holly Township expanding or improving our infrastructure
Road
for.
project,
Yeah. North Holly Road was the last thing they did. That's now a few years ago, and that made a huge difference. But
Isn't there another project coming up, though? Didn't we look at the plan? Shows what I know.
it must be.
That's
This is some good information. I think we're all kind of anxious to say, what is our next step now? Where are we going to go from here? What's our next plan? Because I think we're ready to move on to the next level.
Absolutely. So the next level from your perspective would be public engagement. So thinking about how to actually reach the members of the township and make sure you're reaching them at a rate that you consider reliable. You know, reaching enough people where you're saying, okay, this is a good amount of information. And our scope for this project for public engagement has not quite been decided yet, but we would like to involve all of you in actually conducting that engagement, whether it's roundtables, surveys, whatever that may be. And John and I will work with you to try to figure out exactly what types of engagement would be most appropriate given who you're trying to reach. But I would absolutely recommend a survey as one component of that, in part because surveys are easy and they reach a wide variety of audiences. In some of our other communities, we've designed a digital survey and a flyer, and in Clare, which is a small community, the Planning Commission each took something like 200 flyers and just went crazy across the entire community advertising the survey, and we got like thousands of responses. It was fabulous. So it all depends on how well you're willing to advertise, but surveys can be a really effective method. In other communities, we have had, they just said, okay, here's the online survey, it's on our website. And you don't get that many responses, right? Because who's really visiting the municipal website to say, wow, I'm here to take a survey on the homepage and not just pay my water bill. This is interesting to me. So yeah, it depends on how you advertise. Other than that, I would say, John, I'm interested in some working groups. We discussed that as well.
Yep, I'd be curious what Sharon, what have you seen that's worked in the past?
Mhm.
To get the public engaged and get them to participate.
I'd hate to wait this long, but I think a great way to reach out is with our tax bills, our newsletter, and putting that survey in our newsletter, but that goes out at the end of June.
That'd be cost
But
effective
we're
too.
in June, but I think that would be a really,
That might not be a bad, that might not, it might seem like a long way away, but we can make progress in other parts of the plan in the meantime. If that's the best way to do it.
I think it is.
Okay.
And
So,
of course, our
June.
website and other things that we may be able
Sure.
to, think of, but I think that would be a really good.
Are there any community events that are coming up in May or June before the tax bill goes out? Any kind of, there's not another Disney festival that I haven't heard about, is there?
I'm trying to think of the time when they put stuff up in the bulletin board on the
Okay.
website. So I'll have to look, but there might be things where we could pass out flyers there too.
Yeah, or have a booth. I mean, a lot of times we'll put a table up or something out at an event, at least make people aware.
Yeah.
But we're not gonna do that at the Renaissance Festival.
No.
Lord,
So what's the flyer gonna say?
that's to be determined.
Well, if you're gonna do it in June, you'd have to turn that pretty soon, I would
Yeah.
think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we can turn around information for you guys to look at quite quickly. That's something
what
that we
should
get
it say?
asking for. Advertising the survey is usually one of the primary parts of a flyer, just saying these are the ways you can engage. And also making it a little more interesting. Because to be honest, the general public doesn't really know what a master plan is or necessarily understand why it's important to them. So making sure that the flyer has bright colors that says, we want to hear what your thoughts are for the future of the township. What do you want to see going into the future for 10 years? Making sure it appeals to someone saying, oh, you know what, I am thinking about living here for a while. I would like to give my thoughts on what I want to see in Holly Township.
And I do know there's a craft show for Little League opening day. And as many of us know, Little League is losing a lot of baseball fields, which I'm sure will have something of input.
Yeah, that's interesting because different types of events target different age groups, right? So if you
Mhm.
target Little League,
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
talking about young parents.
Yeah.
And if that's an age group that you want to target for the future growth of Holland
Mhm.
Township, that's the place to hit.
Because I would assume you get a table at the craft show or something, you know, and most everybody, because I mean, it's a whole day thing, so I mean, usually everybody's going in there and at least looking around, so.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And that's coming up this weekend, you said?
April 22nd, I believe is the date.
Okay, not this weekend, but the following weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we'll put our heads together and work with Karen on, you know, what makes the most sense.
Yeah.
So I think,
Effective.
you know, just me personally, the door-to-door thing, you know, like, and you see, you know, comedian skits and stuff, you know, somebody knocks on my door, we're hiding, like, we're not home, we're not answering the door, you know. And I think there's a lot of people like that. When I went and did door-to-door, you know, several years ago, nobody wants to answer the phone. You're interrupting some part of whatever they're doing, you know, and it's,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it can be
So I do
interesting.
agree. I think the newsletter that goes out with the taxes, that's a really good avenue to try to put out information or a survey or whatever. It's more cost effective for the township too, and it is gonna go to a lot of people.
Even if we use the craft fair at the baseball opening day to draw people and let them know that this is happening. you
That's
know,
right.
Maybe that's enough, you know, just to put up some flyers and say, stay tuned, there's more to come.
There's
You know,
more to
instead of
come.
the-
We're
just
working on it.
curiosity.
It's a good idea. And we
Well,
may have some
with
information
the tax
and
bill,
guide
instead of
us.
just a flyer, couldn't we actually do a short survey with that, so they actually have the survey
Absolutely.
and then a date where you're actually be a public meeting? Because you only have so many chances to
Right,
get
exactly.
contact with
Right.
people, so
Mhm.
we actually need to have that ahead of time, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
But I would
best
think if we
practice.
could put the survey in there, if it could be, you know, front and back page or something, that would be the thing to do. 'Cause everybody does get a tax bill. I'm not sure many people look at it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and then online too, because I think a
Mhm.
lot of the younger people want to do it online.
It would
Yeah,
be-
both
So-
options.
Now, I mean, we can put, you know, a link on their flyer to the website, right? So we have a hard copy and online, right?
Yep. Typically, best practice is every hard copy has the due date and then also a scannable QR code. So if someone wants to just pull it up on their phone or send a link of it to a friend, they can do that with ease. So maybe they fill out the physical copy, but they're like, hey, my cousin would like this, and they just send them the link.
And then we'll put it on Facebook too.
Mhm.
We'll do, you know, we can boost that and then we can do a continuous campaign for that.
Yep. And even if you're not doing flyers door to door, flyers in businesses is often very effective. You know, on community posting boards in popular restaurants, grocery stores, those sorts of things where people are already tuning their eyes into a place and they're just like, hey, there that is too. And also, if you put a picture of a dog or a baby on anything, it always helps.
So the groups would be left out of the tax bills would be apartment owners and mobile home or manufactured home residents. So we should do something probably with that. And the other thing is Chamber of Commerce. Seems like we should be contacting them and have, because the business owners should be the ones actually making some of these decisions, because that's the ones that be developing or doing things. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
we should.
Target for sure.
Good point.
All right. Any other questions about next steps? I know it seems a little ambiguous right now, but we
No.
will get it nailed down.
Really good information, so you bring it back to us and tell us. I mean, even if we need to, if our meeting's coming up look a little hectic, I mean, even if we need to do a separate meeting, just rezone in on just those particular things.
So aren't we going to do a meeting for the public?
Yeah.
It seemed like we should set that pretty soon here so that it could be part of this.
We'll
So
have a calendar of events. That's the next thing that Patty and I will work on, and we'll solidify
Okay.
those dates and locations for those events with Karen. Even if it's a hold the date, we can work the details out, but we'll get those dates nailed down so
Okay.
people not go on vacation, so they can come to our, you know.
for these retirees that would be on vacation all the time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So
Very
Karen,
good information.
is the Renaissance Festival going to be at the May meeting?
Well, they did submit their
I don't know
application
about that.
today, but they don't have their plan with it, and I had to invoice them for their fees, so we're getting there.
Okay.
So
Good. All right, very interesting, very good. So moving forward, there's no new business. We can move to reports. Do you have anything, Karen, that you need to report for us?
No other than we did receive application today from the Renaissance Festival.
Okay. And any of the board have anything, any report, anything you'd like to say?
The only thing I have is that I know that Township Parks have put out, you can fill out a citizen participation form if anybody wants to be considered for a Township Parks Board opening. 2 of them.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank our planning group for your help. Thank you for all your help. And we'll be anxious to see what's next.
I have to say, few of us did go to the open house on Shannon Industries. It was very, very nice. I mean, it was very, very nice, very high-end. I mean, when you look at them, because they have 2 other huge plants, I mean, they, they've really done it well. It was presented well.
And they're gonna do more development over there eventually, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now they'll double their distribution
Yeah.
center, they'll add on that,
Yeah.
and then there'll be another manufacturing, and then, yeah, they're gonna grow. Yeah, I think
Amazing,
5,
wonderful people.
Up to 5.
Good work.
Oh, they're great people. Yeah, it's
They were-
amazing.
They were very good to work with. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at, somebody comes in with a site plan like that and they can move it through your township and move it
The
through
way that
here
they
like
did
that.
it.
You have to say they've got their ducks in a row.
And the amount of
Very
money
nice.
that they invested.
Very, very nice.
So they spent millions on their well and septic, but then when it became available from Genesee County, Grand Blanc, they brought that in as well.
So they're already connected to, really,
They, yeah,
right down,
to their plant.
right down Dixie Highway?
Mhm. And they paid for it after all that other investment.
And then
Yeah.
capacity and the pipes and everything?
Yeah.
And
But that's probably the future because they plan on expanding a lot more, and otherwise they'd have to expand the well and probably septic system. So it's probably still looking forward to the future there for them.
And they are looking for employees, so get the word out, and they pay for all of your schooling, and there's no books on that. If you decide that it's not for you, they don't make you pay it back.
Mm. Very impressive. Okay, moving forward, public comment. This is our time for anybody in the audience. If you have anything you'd like to comment to our board. No? Okay. All right, with that, I don't think we have anything else, so I'm not sure what time it is, but I will make a motion that we adjourn.
7:24.
What was it?
7:24.
7:20, really? Wow, okay.
Your record.
Good job,
Makes a difference
everyone.
when there's lots of
Meeting
things.
adjourned. Thank you.
I don't know, I was afraid of
Good
it.
job, good job.
Imagine if we could go on forever.
Yeah, it was,